Good evening, friends and members of the Baton Rouge chapter of the Louisiana Archaeological Society. I'm Brandy, this is Margot, and welcome to August's virtual presentation. We have Dr. David Chicoine with us tonight. Dr. Chicoine is an associate professor in anthropology at LSU. Dr. Chicoine, can you give us a little bit about some of your background for anybody who doesn't know?
I'm an archaeologist, and I'm from Montreal, and I've been trained there in the four-field anthropological approach. I did my undergrad and master there, and then I moved to the UK and did a PhD there. And I've been focusing on Andean archaeology and doing fieldwork in the coast of Peru for about 20 years now. And I think I've presented twice at BRLAS in the past. So it's my third time.
Great. Okay, well, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and turn the floor over to you.
Shoot. Yes. Okay. So I will. Well, hello everybody, and thanks for being here in those strange times. Let's hope the Russians are right. They have the vaccine, so we'll see how that goes. Well, let me share my screen with you. So are you able to see a PowerPoint now?
Yep.
All right. So today actually today I should be probably, if there was no pandemic, I should probably be flying back from Peru after the second season of a field project at a site called Cerro San Isidro. But surprisingly, that didn't happen. So I'll be talking about the 2019 excavations, which we did between July and August 2019. Yes, so where to start? I'll be talking about a site that is located in the Nepeña Valley. This is on the north central coast of Peru. And those who might be familiar with my previous talks at BRLAS, I did talk about some previous excavations, and I think I talked about Moche burial patterns, and then I also talked about early horizon urbanism and spatial organization. And today I'll talk about my new project, which began in 2019 and was theoretically slated for 3 seasons until 2021. Now with the pandemic, I assume that we'll be at least in the field until 2022, and then we'll see how things go. But so Nepeña is a small valley. It's in the department of Ancash, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but suffice it to say that it was put on the map of Peruvian prehistory fairly early in the history of research in the 1930s. Julio Tello, whom we see here on the upper left, did some excavations at formative period temples, so going back about 1000 to 1500 BC, and he found some spectacular things. Friezes, also you can see the stone pestle and mortar, and these are kind of engraved, and but then the valley wasn't really studied much, with the exception of survey work by American archaeologists Richard Daggett and Donald Prue, and they were at the time based at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And here's a photo of them actually in Ica on the south coast. But then, so the valley is fairly small. It's away from major colonial cities, and that might be why archaeologists haven't really spent much time in the valley. But starting in the 21st century, there was a series of projects, and now the valley is kind of much better known, and field research has been kind of booming, and I'm showing here some of those projects. So today I'll basically be talking about this project here at San Isidro. And there's probably close to 400 sites in Nepeña. And we start to really understand fairly well certain of these sites. So I mentioned my previous talks at BRLAS, but I talked about Wambacho and I talked about Kailan. Some of the famous sites, Cerro Blanco, Puncuri, that's where Tello worked in the 30s. Pañamarca, perhaps the most famous site for its moche murals. Maybe you've heard of the moche. And just to mention briefly, in coastal Peru, we tend to divide valleys in lower, middle, and upper divisions, and the lower valleys are this coastal desert environment, and the upper valleys are the closest to the Andes and the mountains. So I've been working mainly in the lower valley, so in kind of this flat delta where it's usually walking distance from the ocean, but this new project really focuses more on the middle valley. And these environments are known as yungas or yunga in the coast of Peru, and they're a bit different. They're a bit more sunny, and there's actually a bit more rain. And today, that's where most fruits for export are grown, like mangoes and avocados. So it's been a bit different for me working there. And so, for instance, conservation is a bit different and it's not as good because it's a bit more humid. And you know, on the coast, you find amazingly well-preserved things. So there's a bit, there's a lot on this diagram, and I don't have time to go into much detail, but just to say that with these new field projects in the last 20 years or so, we kind of understand much better Nepeña, and especially the lower valley. And this is a bit the kind of thing that we've came to realize based on excavations at various sites. And yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail, but you might see these names here and might be familiar with some of them. They refer to art styles, Cupisnique, Chavin, Salinar, Viru or Gallinazo. And then some of the major processes that we see developing, including, for instance, a decrease in deer hunting that seems to be correlated with an increase in animal husbandry and agriculture. So these are guinea pigs. So one guinea pig is less guinea pig, many guinea pigs is more guinea pigs in the diagram, and llamas or camelids. There's also warfare that seems to develop around 700 BC. The project I'll talk about is part of a broader program that is entitled The Rise of Divine Lordships in the Ancient Andes, and it's a project that is funded by the NSF and the HRC, and it's in collaboration with Dr. George Lau of the University of East Anglia, was my doctoral advisor. And you can visit the website if you're interested. And the project really looked at the emergence of polities or state societies, if you wish, that had rulers that differentiated themselves from commoners by claiming to be you know, supernatural or divine. And the project focuses on comparing two regions in that same department of Ancash in the north central area of Peru, but one region in the actual mountains. So George Lau focuses on Pashash. It's an ancient center in the Payasca region, and I'm focusing on the Cerro San Isidro site. And yeah, here you can see a map with Cerro San Isidro, and why we chose this site in the, it's called the Moro region, this kind of pocket here of the middle Nepeña, is because it is central. It's visible from most areas, especially from different ceremonial centers around Moro. So it is centrally located, and it seems to also have been a major center of demographic growth. So we know this because of the survey of a colleague of mine, Hugo Ikehara, who is a Peruvian archaeologist who did his PhD at the University of Pittsburgh, and he did survey this region comprehensively in 2012 and 2013. And he did what we call a non-site comprehensive survey. So he wasn't interested in locating sites, he was interested in actually recovering materials from everywhere in this region. And by quantifying the amount of pottery sherds in different lots, he was able to estimate the number of people that had lived in this region over time. And just for the sake of the presentation here, 2 periods of interest, or this 800 to 450 BC horizon, or the late formative, and 450 to 150 BC, the second half of the early horizon, or also known as the final formative. And based on Ikehara's work, it appears that San Isidro, well, first of all, emerged as the kind of first demographic center, perhaps with people, with up to about 2,000 people by the middle of the first millennium BC. And then in the following period, the region probably exploded up to more than 12,000 people, with San Isidro remaining one of the main centers, but with other centers emerging, including Cushipampa. So the main point here is the site itself looks like it was a major center. And perhaps a good candidate to study the rise of those divine lords. And from the survey work of Ikehara also, and I've been to the site on a few occasions before 2019, at the surface we can see pottery styles of all the periods of the pre-Hispanic sequence. So it does seem to have been occupied over a long period of time. So that was a major variable also that we considered. So here's an aerial view, the Google Earth image of the site. And it's obviously been encroached by agriculture today. Here's the river. It's very close to the river. Well, the river is here. There's 2 sectors. That this is what Peru did in the late 60s, and site 51 and site 50, but it could be probably considered one site. And obviously there's also materials in all these fields everywhere. So you can think of this as one, large ancient settlement. And you can see obviously some stone architecture visible at the surface here, some terracing going around here, some, more platforms here. A few photographs. The site is also known for its megalithic architecture. So it's something in that region that is quite, if you wish, diagnostic of that early horizon. So people carve these very large blocks to build temples and fortresses and things like this. This, just an anecdote, you can see how obviously it's all in rubble today, and you can see some standing walls, but people of the area have memories of this actually standing, and it was most destroyed in the 1970 earthquake that is quite famous in Ancash. So until 50 years ago, this was still a standing fortress or temple. You can see another wall here. There's a central staircase. You can see it here. That probably came down here. But here's a drone shot of that Puente Piedra. But our work in 2019, our first field season really focused on San Isidro, which is the largest of the 2 sectors. And you can see a map that was made by Ikehara, and some of the, terracing here. So what did we do in 2019? Well, it's the first excavations at the site. So, or the first scientific excavations, obviously Huaqueros, or looters or tomb raiders or excavated there, and hence we recovered lots of materials at the surface. But in terms of scientific archaeology, we were the first one to excavate there in 2019. We dug 7 block excavations and 8 test units for up to close to 200 square meters. We confirmed what we knew from the surface, that the site was occupied from the middle of that early horizon period, probably as early as 600 BCE or before the Common Era, to just before the Inca arrived in the region, probably in the 15th or 16th century. The Inca conquered the north coast of Peru in the last decade or so of the 15th century, about 30 years before the Spanish arrived. And we know this because of the style of pottery. So here's some early horizon or Hanabariu style pottery, or the famous circle and dot that has been traditionally associated with the Chevin culture. Some Requai pottery, so that fine kaolin, white clay that is very common more in the highlands. Some red, white, black, or also known as Kasma or tricolor style. So that is a bit later in the sequence, probably close to 800 to 1000 CE. And then finally, here's some more Kasma in size. So that's contemporary with the tricolor. And finally, some Chimu blackware. So that's an archaeological culture that just predates the arrival of the Inca in the region, and the Chimu themselves probably conquered the Nepeña Valley in the 14th century and perhaps in the late 13th, but just before the Inca arrived. So what that basically told us is that the site had been occupied for perhaps 2,500 years, and that really kind of confirm what we knew from the surface. We did some drone mapping. Here's a drone shot of San Isidro. You can see Moto in the back. That's where we stayed, and that was kind of nice because we could walk. It was about 15 minutes. And I say we, I didn't include myself because I actually hurt my leg before the field season, so I was pretty useless and stayed at the house most days. So what I'm showing here is the result of my team's work mainly. Oh, yeah, I should point out. So we focused our excavation to around here on, we call it compound 3, and that's also part of my injury. I couldn't get up on top of the hill, so I still wanted to see what was going on. So we decided to scale down the excavation project and focus on this area. There was a little road here, so I could kind of get up there. But yeah, here's a drone shot of our excavation unit. And you can see this was about midway through, so we opened more units around here and around here. Yeah, this is a compound that appears to be late, and it's a stone enclosure with a series of divisions, and from the pottery it seems to be Chimu, so that late intermediate period, perhaps 1300 CE or 1400 CE. But then what was fascinating is what we found underneath this, and this is where we did some vertical excavations. Here our excavation. And actually this is a square or rectangular terrace, so the hill would have naturally kind of broke here. So all of this is, if you wish, human made. Very briefly, we also did some mapping of surface ground stones, which are used to process food and cereals, chili peppers, maize, etc. And we find tremendous density. We only map a quarter of the surface of the site and found close to 600 ground stones. This is a lot. So we still have to do this when we get back to the field. And I mean, I expect we'll have probably 2,000 or more of those, and that obviously attest to the density of domestic use, but also it attests to the long-term and kind of multi-component nature of the site, so it's been reoccupied. So what we did in terms of excavations in that compound 3 or unit 3, we were able to document 3 phases of construction or occupation: an early phase, which is going back to that formative period, that early horizon period. And then on top of this, we found a middle phase, which is probably associated with the Casma culture, or perhaps could be associated with that middle horizon that is known in Peru, and then a late phase that is Chimu, or late intermediate period. I'm showing here a photograph of 2 grad students who worked with us last summer. Monica Fenton, who's with her big hat here, and Chris Stuffer Nicosia, and they're basically clearing complete pots that we found in a storeroom. And where we ended up excavating ended up being pretty much the kitchen area and the storage area of that compound. Here's where that unit 3 is located. Here's that specific storeroom. You can see, it's a kind of a 1.5 by 1.5 meter. And then when people left, they just left their pots there. We found quite a few complete pots, which is quite fascinating. So, yeah, that vertical excavation showed, for instance, that this late stone compound is built on top of an adobe or mud brick compound of that middle phase, and the pottery associated with that middle phase is that tricolor and that Casma style, and the black where the Chimu stuff is associated with that late phase. And then underneath both of these, there's a formative, an earlier phase. So the previous photo was taken from this room, and there's a lot of questions. There seems to be lots of kind of reuse of earlier materials in the construction, for instance, of walls. Here's an early formative necklace jar or necklace olla. I should mention we have carbon samples from all these phases. We exported them in the UK to be sent and dated at the Oxford accelerator unit, and then the pandemic started, and then we're still waiting for the lab to reopen, and they should reopen on September 1st. So we're hoping to get dates in the next few months, but it's still in the air. So we've done some photogrammetry of all these excavation units. So we took hundreds of photos or thousands of photos, and we're still processing that to get 3D models of the excavation. And we began analyzing the findings, so lithics, pottery sherds. It's very rich, so we have a metric ton of pottery. Literally, it's a lot of pottery. Here's some projectile points that date to that formative period. Here's a greater bowl that was actually found in a burial. Here's the fragment of a game board. So these were stone tablets that were carved for games, a bit like chess, if you wish, like an Indian version of chess. That Indianist thing have to do with perhaps warfare. And we began also the analysis of pottery, so that includes obviously the shape of the vessel, but also the composition of the paste and technology, and try to figure out how pottery was made and things like this. And we're also doing photogrammetry with the objects themselves. So here's a screenshot of one of the complete pots. And this is a sling, a fragment of a sling that was found at the surface. I'm just showing this because the conservation is not very good, but we did find some artifacts that are more like organic. So there's hope, We still have to screen and float a bit more to find plant remains. So just to wrap up in terms of the implication of our first season, well, we've kind of confirmed the long and occupation and multi-component aspect of the site. And one major aspect will be to study it as one of those Casma site, and I'm showing here the other known Casma site. And if you know Elizabeth Cruzado, she's working at Nivin in the Casma Valley. So Cerro San Isidro should be considered also as a center of development during that middle horizon and late intermediate period. And there's a lot of questions that we'll have to investigate, and that includes also the reoccupation of previous sites. And I'm showing here a photo of Kailan, where I've worked for several years, and how middle horizon and late intermediate people that lived at this site known as Pan de Azúcar reoccupied the Kailan ruins as a cemetery. So they, buried their dead in the different structures and really interacted with that landscape. And it seems to be the same at Cerro San Isidro, and we need to study this in more detail. So I just want to acknowledge everybody who took part in the project, and obviously the funding agency, also a Ministry of Culture, and the whole team, and also the Morinos, or the people of Moro, who for their hospitality, and also Brandy and Margot for organizing these talks, and thank you all for your attention.
Awesome, thanks so much. So do y'all have any idea why those sites were abandoned? Like, is there any theories as to what might have happened to cause them to just leave like that?
Well, yeah, for Cerro San Isidro, it is probably an elite center, so it's a bit, I think, what the survey by Hugo showed is that there's people in this region continuously. The fact that these elite centers are abandoned doesn't necessarily mean that the region is abandoned, right? So, but yeah, we don't know. But I mean, I think that at Kailan, for instance, where I've worked before, it could be seen as an urban center that was kind of forced a little bit by a rise in armed conflicts and violence. So many of these sites often don't last very well. They last several centuries, but it's not like cities that are occupied for thousands of years. So people tend to congregate, if you wish, or nucleate for a few centuries, and we see these kind of rulers emerging, but it's not a long-lasting necessarily phenomenon. And then the authority of these leaders kind of dissolve again. And but for like the common person in the field living in a hamlet, it probably didn't change much, right? You're just farming. I mean, maybe I should have mentioned this. These are agrarian societies, or agrarian complex societies, and these elite centers kind of pop up, perhaps channeling tribute or taxes. So their authority is often unstable or elusive, right? But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
There aren't many questions that we often can't answer, to be honest. We just create more questions.
Yeah, but again, I mean, we'll, at Cerro San Isidro, we'll absolutely know more. I mean, the thing is, our sample is so tiny, and we've really focused on that unit 3 now. But I mean, my impression is that the site is never abandoned, but like some bits are used at different times, and like I mentioned Puente Piedra, that megalithic square thingy on the hill. There, at the base of this, there seems to be a cemetery, and then from what I've figured out last year, but we haven't excavated yet, is that people who lived at San Isidro in those later periods, right, the middle horizon and later intermediate period, they kind of reuse that formative temple or fortress as a cemetery, the base of it. So it's quite it's like a palimpsest of occupation, right? So that's where the concept of site is a bit problematic. Like this, the compound I talked about today, that compound 3. We don't really know if it was the only thing occupied on that hill for, maybe a century, or we don't know. We don't know. So was there people in other areas of that hill, or was there nobody else? We have lots of questions to answer for sure. Yeah, and even
hopefully y'all be able to get back out there, this coming summer, maybe.
yeah, we should be there in May, late May. We've really done nothing so far, so we have lots of material, so that was the good thing. We didn't have to excavate that much to get thousands of pottery sherds and hundreds of lithics and all of this, but again, like we sampled less than 200 square meters. The site is about, it's not very large, it's about maybe like 1,000 square meters or something like this. That's Cerro San Isidro. No, it's 1,000. Yeah, about 1,000. So, again, it might be a bit scattered for your audience who might not know my previous work, but Kailan, if you're familiar with Kailan, it's a huge site that has a core of 80 or 90 hectare, and in terms of occupation, in terms of density and intensity of occupation, we have almost nothing. I mean, we map a bit fewer than 300 groundstones at Kailan, and just a quarter of the site at San Isidro we have close to 600, or I mean, it's really dense. It's really dirty. There's a lot of trash, and again, it probably tells a lot about the fact that this center is in the middle of that pocket. It's at the confluence of the rivers who will form the Nepeña. You can see and kind of look at the fields from all of the hill. So it's an extremely strategic location. So my guess is that it's never abandoned, but what we see, or from the excavation, is we see 3 phases, and we'll see with the dates what comes back, but yeah.
So I know that you said that there's basically 2 portions to the site, or you could call it one site as a whole with the agricultural intrusion between. Do you have any plans for the area to the southwest to go investigate that?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah, ideally we would, that's another project in the project. So we need to, we didn't really do a proper mapping also. So we did a bit of drone mapping. We had the total station with us, but I couldn't walk, and then it was kind of all overwhelming. So we just stuck to the drone mapping and what Hugo Ikehara had done, but we haven't really mapped much. So the terracing also is a big question. So we have to also run the drone everywhere and map all the terraces. But that Puente Piedra, we have to excavate it, at least test it to get some carbon dates. That cemetery hypothesis I mentioned, was it really reused as a cemetery? We have to test this, but from just walking to the surface, which I was able to do at some point, I walked it with Audrey DeLuca, and I let her climb on top, and I say, take photos, because I couldn't. But from all the Huaquero pits or Looters pits, the pottery looks like late, but the architecture is early, is that formative stuff. So and then to answer your question with the fields and all this, ideally, we would also be sampling the fields. Now, my colleague Hugo, he walked the fields and he collected the pottery. He hasn't really excavated the fields. But again, like for now, that's perhaps a bit too much for us. But we'll see in a few years. But yeah, there's each site in coastal Peru could easily be studied for 20, 30 years, you know. I mean, the major sites like Huaca de la Luna or Chan Chan or Pachacamac or, you know, San Jose de Moro, Citan, I mean, these sites are excavated all year round for decades, and we still have questions. So San Isidro is really the beginning, and we're a tiny project. I mean, we were in the field about 10 or so at most. And we moved, you know, yeah, I don't have on top of my head in terms of cubic meters, but we moved a bit of dirt, but it's nothing compared to, you know, larger projects. But we have a lot to do for sure.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for, you know, being willing to do this virtual adjustment during all this. So we thank everybody for joining us, and we hope that y'all stay healthy and safe, and same to you, Dr. Chicoine.
Yeah, of course.
And we will see everyone next month. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.